It's like every time you turn on the TV, there is a new major development. Yeah, maybe you thought that you would have a nice, relaxing afternoon on the beach. But nope, they took a tanker. Oh, yikes, make that two. Ooh, it had a Russian flag. Indeed, 2026 is the year that keeps on giving with world conflict. So let's spend yet another day trying to dissect what happened. First with the descriptive facts about the seizures. Then how this fits into the great game featuring the United States, China, and Russia. And finally, what is happening with the oil diplomacy in Venezuela, which is how these seizures got started in the first place. Okay, regarding the two seizures, one of these was fairly simple. This is U.S. Southern Command video of the capture of the MT Sophia. It was holding about 2 million barrels of crude and tried to run the U.S. blockade around Venezuela. I do not know why you would try to do that at this point, but they did. The U.S. Coast Guard seized the vessel, and there is not much more to report on here. The other situation is much more interesting. At almost the same time, the United States also seized the MV Bella 1. You might recall that this was the tanker that had been the subject of a weeks-long slow-speed chase that would make O.J. Simpson blush. It remains a bit of a mystery why the United States chose not to board the Bella while it was still near the blockade assets. There may be insufficient Coast Guard forces in the region to handle the abundance of seizure targets if multiple move at the same time. Thus, it sped away at about 9 knots, which is considerably slower than what U.S. naval vessels can travel at. As such, they just stayed behind, watching from afar. What made the situation bizarre is that the tanker did not have any oil aboard, and its previous port call was in Iran. This led to speculation that it may have been trying to covertly deliver weapons to Venezuela, and so it ran away from the blockade to try to hide that. Again, though, that is just speculation at the moment, even if it is still something to keep an eye on. Anyway, to celebrate the new year, the ship renamed itself the Marinera and tried to change its flag mid-voyage by painting the Russian tricolor on the side of the ship. That, of course, is not something that you can do according to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which only gave the United States more justification to board it. Then came reports that Russia sent a submarine to first rendezvous with the Bella before escorting it somewhere, presumably Russia. Of course, the United States intercepts tankers by deploying troops via helicopter. Consequently, I am not exactly sure what Russia's plan was here. Launch supercavitating torpedoes at the vessels from which helicopters could depart from? Congrats, that sends you straight to World War III. So the helicopters just landed as they did when they captured the skipper, as seen here. The tanker formerly known as the Bella did not make it past Iceland. As always, the key to winning confrontations between nuclear powers is to force the other side to shoot first. They cannot without risking a larger exchange, and so you get to win the battle by default. If Russian soldiers were physically aboard the ship, that would be one thing. U.S. troops would have to shoot through them to capture the tanker, and so the White House would not even order them to board the ship. Do not be surprised if that is the next step for tankers departing from Russian ports, as Russian mill bloggers and hawkish lawmakers are up in arms over this. Submarines, though, are a no-go. And so the United States has won the round without much effort. Now, do not immediately expect the United States to extend the campaign to the rest of the Shadow Fleet operating out of Russia. Well, at least not directly. Indirectly, the United States has been feeding intelligence to Ukraine to do that. But it does show that the United States will not allow Moscow to extend its network unimpeded. Anyway, I think this speaks to a larger but silly narrative that has been making the rounds since the 3-hour fracas in Caracas. This is the one that says that some sort of grand conspiracy has been brokered among Russia, China, and the United States, where Russia has been granted its former near abroad as its zone of influence, China has been granted Taiwan, and the United States has been granted the Western Hemisphere. What we have seen over the last week is allegedly the first step of implementing the new policy. Okay, this is wrong on so many levels. For one thing, any sort of grand conspiracy of areas of influence as a general concept would not be anything new. The world has always worked that way. It was just a question of whose lines went further. I suppose it is okay if people have forgotten about the Concert of Europe, But the Cold War was exactly this principle, and a whole lot of people are still around to remember it. For another, good luck to Russia trying to take Ukraine even if the United States gave the country away. Moscow has been trying to do that for 4 years now, and still only has 20% of Ukraine to show for it. Even if the United States stopped providing intelligence to Ukraine, and stopped selling arms to Ukraine via the NATO Pearl Initiative, Russia still would not be able to rapidly conquer Kyiv. And the rest of the near abroad? Unless something changes inside of Russia to allow the Kremlin to engage in mass mobilization, Russian troops stand little chance of succeeding anywhere around the Baltics, Poland, or Finland. The military is just far too depleted after what has happened in Ukraine. A similar sentiment applies to China. As it stands now, China is probably incapable of taking Taiwan in a cost-effective manner. The same claim may be questionable in, say, 5 or 10 years. That timeline explains a lot of how we got into this mess, with the Pentagon long trying to complete an Indo-Pacific pivot precisely to stop that. But there is still no deal to be struck there. In any case, to put it all together, there is nothing for Russia and China to trade with the United States. The United States can do what it wants in the Western Hemisphere because it has the power to do so, and neither Beijing nor Moscow has the power to stop it. You cannot extract concessions without leverage, and they have none. That is why they look on helplessly from their capitals. And that takes us to the final question for today. If the United States can do what it wants in the Western Hemisphere without overseas influence, what exactly does it want to do in Venezuela? Well, part of that is to terminate Russian and Chinese influence in the country. But with that checked off the list right now, there are some economic considerations at play. A Trump Truth Social post from last night provided what appeared to be some indication of the next steps. Venezuela will be turning over between 30 and 50 million barrels of high-quality sanctioned oil to the United States of America. This oil will be sold at its market price, and that money will be controlled by me to ensure that it is used to benefit the people of Venezuela and the United States. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Q concerns that Trump is coercing Venezuela to extract all of its oil, effectively holding its now acting president Delcy Rodriguez as a de facto hostage. Cooperate with their oil extraction, or we will do to you what we did to Maduro. In light of both Trump's comments and that concern, I think it is worth keeping an eye on exactly what will happen here. At the same time, I also think it is worth treating Trump as an unreliable narrator, not necessarily because he has malicious intent, but rather because he tailors basically everything he says to the small percentage of Americans who like big numbers and a tough-talking president. In addition, Trump has never been great at articulating the nuances of geopolitical strategy, as we saw at the press conference following the capture of Maduro. So let him say the splashy stuff, but perhaps do not pay much attention to the particulars of his words. I know that sounds weird given that he has the bully pulpit, and so news organizations are going to print what he has to say. However, for the most part, I am instead paying attention to Marco Rubio if I want to understand the nuance of Venezuelan policy. This is for a few reasons. 1, he has always been better at communicating nuance. 2, it is his job as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor to craft policy. Better to hear it from the source than it is to play a game of telephone with Trump. And 3, Venezuela has always been his pet project, so he is almost certainly running point on all of the major moves here. Of course, Trump is still president and can still override him, so I am not completely ignoring Trump. But the hierarchy here is Rubio then Trump, not vice versa. And the nuance of the policy from Rubio is that the United States will effectively be playing the role of an escrow agent. Venezuela hands over the crude to the United States. The United States then sells the crude on the international market, notably at regular market rates, not at the discount that Venezuela previously gave on the gray market. The United States then holds that money and only disperses it if Venezuela meets certain conditions. This is a fairly normal way of actually conducting a regime transition, which again, looking to Rubio, is still the goal. Rodriguez stays in her position because neither party wants Venezuela to descend into chaos. But if the oil is free-flowing and without any conditions, it is very easy for Venezuela to return to a Maduro-like system. Now, the United States wields great leverage here. The embargo effectively leaves Venezuela with few other options, so it can enforce quite a few terms on Venezuela, with Rodriguez's only business play to shut down the oil wells entirely. That leads to questions of exactly how much the United States will extract as the escrow agent. If the answer is nearly all of it, and the terms are give maybe $1 to the people of Venezuela, but then keep whatever remains for yourself, then you can imagine the international condemnation that will follow, never mind what Congress will be interested in. But at least for the time being, this is exactly how a sanctions regime would normally operate, minus the rather abnormal social media posts, and minus, to a lesser degree, the congressional concerns if Trump truly ends up in direct control over the money, rather than through a domestic legal process. Meanwhile, if you want to learn more about the crisis in Venezuela, check out the full playlist that I have on the subject. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.